Oh, you thought you'd get me with wing attack, did you? Well, you weren't counting on Thunderbolt! Oh, hello. Don't mind me, I get a bit carried away with these retro games. Lately, I have been kind of obsessed with a Pokemon Emerald mod called Pokemon Yellow Recharged, and it's reminded me how beautiful the graphics on these games were. So, because I was inspired by this game, I thought today we'd dive in and try our own hand at pixeling up some Pokemon Emerald-inspired game sprites. Follow along and let's see what we can cook up.
Well, oodalally, here we are back in my new favourite app, A-Sprite. And, gosh diggity darn, this is one heck of a sprite sheet. Shout out to Vikun here for putting this together. Basically what we have here are all the sprites for the Generation 3 Pokemon, which I think is the perfect springboard for our purposes today. The Game Boy Advance was fancy schmancy indeed, and could show up to 512 colours at once on the screen. But we should note that each of these sprites only uses a palette of 16 colours, or to be more precise, 15 colours and one transparency channel. They're also at a size of 64 by 64 pixels, so we are going to create a document with those dimensions. And ye know where this be headin', yar! Yes. Head up to your File menu and create a new sprite with 64 by 64 pixels. Don't worry about the rest of the settings for now, let's just leave everything as is. So now that we have our lovely blank canvas, you might be thinking, by the flamin' red hair of Eddie Redmayne, what sort of sprite are we gonna create? And that would be a very fair question, to which I would answer, it's time to take out your notebooks. Yes, when creative blocks got you down, it's time to reach for a notebook. Or 10. The idea being that you can create some Pokemon-y sort of sprites of your very own. So here are some that I created earlier, and as you can see, they've all got kind of a Pokemon-y flavour, even though they're rather awful, excuse my sketching skills. But today we're going to go with the one in the top left, which I have named Scutum. And once you've selected a little sprite to pixel up, the next thing to do is to select a Pokemon sprite that already exists that has a colour palette similar to what you're thinking of. For this example, I'm actually going to choose the little Hoppip sprite here because, well, Hoppip's one of my favourite Pokemon for a start, and also the colours seem to be what I'm after. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste it into our little canvas here. Now you'll notice immediately that we've got a bunch of colours in the top left here that don't quite match what we're after. We want to use the colour palette from Hoppip, so I'm going to go up and adjust that. In A-Sprite, this is very simple. You just go to the little options menu here, and down the bottom you'll see an option saying New Palette from Sprite. Click on that, and of course we want to adjust the number of colors to 16, because that's our limitation for this sprite. And there we have it. Up in the corner here, you can now see that it's brought in the colors from Hoppip and gotten rid of the old palette. Perfect! The next thing to do is to create a new layer, so hit Shift-N to do so. Double-click on the name to rename it whatever you want. I'm going to call it Scutum in this case. And at this juncture, we can say goodbye to our little Hoppip friend. He's served his purpose, we've got his colours, and we don't need to see him anymore. Once again, Shift-N to create one more layer, which I'm going to just name BG for background. You might notice that I'm still not entirely used to this program. You have to actually click on the yellow border of some objects to move them. So I'm just reordering the layers down here to put background behind. And then I'm going to choose the white color from the palette and just fill the background layer so we're working with a white background, even though the sprite layer itself will have a transparent background. We can start sketching, so I'm just going to choose a dark red color from the palette, and using my nifty schmifty little reference image, I'm going to start tracing out a rough outline of the Pokemon sprite. This little Scutum is kind of shaped like a mushroom, so I'm going to make sure that I've got that mushroom bell kind of shape. It's actually a little too familiar to Parasect, but what the heck. Once you're happy with the rough outline, it's time to go in and fix up any jaggy little pixels. Anything that's going to break up that soft curve of the shape, so just clean it up a little bit. And then I'm going to go straight into the eyes. And I've designed this character with big, flat eyes that are set in a kind of permanent, unnerving stare. So that's what I'm going to do first, make sure they're in the right positions. And after that, we can leap straight into detailing the rest of the body, beginning with these little spots that he has. And after that, I can go in and actually start doing his little feet. And I gave him these stumpy kind of marshmallow feet that stick out from under his body, which I thought was a nice little comedic element to offset from that stare he has. Because honestly,
sometimes One needs to break up the serious nature of life with a little comedy.
Now let's go ahead and fill in some of these shapes we've created. And those of you who have watched my videos for a while will know where I'm about to head with this, because I'm going to tell you to always remember where your light source is. In this case, it's coming from the upper right, which means it will leave some specular highlights on that side of the character and some shadows on the opposite side. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to block out these specular highlights, and I'm going to use the lighter shade of orangey red to do this, just trying to imagine if this were a 3D object where that light would fall. And after I've done the specular highlight, I'm going to head over to the other side, and using the darker shade of reddy orange, I'm going to try and draw out some shadows across the bottom of his body, on his feet, wherever I think this overhang would cast a shadow. And we're off to a good start. Now let's switch back to our main Pokemon sprite sheet here for a second, just to have a look at how the pros are doing their specular highlights. And you can see it's very similar. They're using this blobby technique. On the Hoppip you can see that bright little blotch on the front of his head, which also demonstrates that I've made a crucial error with our own sprite. You see, the light source here is definitely coming from the top left, whereas I have done it from the top right. Okay, it's not that bad. I will address this later. It's not something that we need to worry about because it doesn't really affect the techniques that we're exploring today. Back to the sprite. I want to bring out this highlight a bit more, so I've chosen a lighter color still, and I've just popped that on top of the highlight we've already got. And now I'm just going to go around and clean up some of the detailing, take away some of the outlines. Again, just trying to keep in mind where shadows should fall, which areas are raised, which are sunken. And you can see that I've decided that on his main cap, these little spots are going to be slightly sunken. So they have a shadow on the right-hand side, and they've got a little bit of a highlight on the left side. I'm going to adjust the shadows on the feet, and now just add a bit more body detailing, some little wrinkles to his mushroom cap. And at this point, I think it's time to move on to outlining. Now, before we get started, let's just check our reference sheet one more time, because I want our sprite to be as consistent as possible with the Pokemon Gen 3 sprites. And the first thing you're going to notice when you study these sprites closely is that none of them have a solid black outline. They all have an outline, but the artists have opted for the sell-out technique. And that's not what it sounds like.
You're a sellout! A sellout! You hear? Good gravy.
Indeed. But actually, sell-out stands for selective outlining. And basically the technique here is to choose a few harmonious colors that match the sprite, and use them to outline the sprite while keeping things a bit gentler. So you can see that instead of using solid black, for the Ivysaur sprite they've used some shades of green, for example. The sell-out technique is one of my favorites because it results in really beautiful looking imagery, so that's what we're going to do for our own little sprite. So let's start by, once again, keeping in mind our light source and drawing the darkest outlines where we think the shadows would be the deepest. After which we will lighten the outlines which we think are closest to the light source. And at this point you'll see that I get a little sidetracked and start trying to design the little decorative elements of this character as I sketched in the beginning. I pictured these as kind of little bubbles of poison or something, but this is a perfect example of not having fleshed something out properly and how it can sabotage your efforts later on, because this actually doesn't pan out. So let's not dwell on that. You can see that I've adjusted the shading a little bit by adding some dithering just to soften up those highlights a bit. And what is dithering, you might ask? What a wonderful question! Dithering is just one of many shading techniques available to you in pixel art. On the left we can see a sprite that uses a cell shading technique, which basically makes the sprite look a little more cartoony and flat, and on the right we have dithered shading, which basically introduces these little lattice pixels just to soften up highlights and shadows. Now, something else your keen little eagle eyes might have picked up is that I've adjusted the colors of our palette somewhat. This was because I realized that Hoppip's colors weren't quite serving this character properly, and of course the goal with any pixel art is to make sure we have the best possible result, so I've basically substituted some colors for some others, and I'll keep playing with it as we go forward. But of course I'm going to stay to that restriction of 15 colors plus one transparency channel. The Game Boy Advance was actually capable of showing a range of, I think, 32,000 colors or something, so we have a lot available to us, and I thought, well, why not delve into that a little? Now I'm also going to change the character's feet to a kind of pinky purple shade, again just because I want this character to look as charismatic and as interesting as possible. And it's usually a good idea to break up the color scheme in your sprite if you're able to, which I am. And that's not all. Another thing I'm able to edit are characteristics which I think are a little boring, so what I'm going to do is shift this guy up and actually remove those poison bubbles and instead give him some nice little green tentacles. For a while here, I was actually thinking, oh, what if he's actually a grass and water type Pokemon? In which case, he might not be a mushroom, but more of a jelly. And this idea took me quite a bit further than the poison bubbles did. However, I eventually decided that, no, I don't want him to be a water type after all. I think I'll stick to a plain grass type. So instead of having little tentacles, I switched them up and made them into vines.
Behold! The power and majesty of destructive editing.
Yes, this did take a bit of work to rejigger. However, I think it turned out much better, and the character looks a lot more interesting. You may disagree and think that the tentacle version was better. I'm actually still torn, to be honest, now that I've seen everything again. And, as is the case with all endeavors, at some point a hard decision has to be made.
Not you! Not you! Not you! You!
Okay, I swear no more of them for a little while. Anyway, I'm going to speed things up because here I end up doing a bit of cleaning up. I edit the shadows a little bit, I deepen some of them, I even add some little eyebrows, and more importantly, I actually get rid of that dithering effect and return to the cel-shaded look because I think, again, it's just more fitting. This sprite actually ends up using both styles of shading, but I think that's totally permissible, seeing as the official Pokemon sprites do the same thing. Alright, now in the spirit of exploration, let's talk about the eyes. Originally I had these little dot eyes which I thought were very intense and strange, and here I just start playing with different styles of eyes because I just want to demonstrate what an incredible difference just a few little pixels can make. So I experiment with some different shapes, from small and vertical to small and round, to giving him big, dewy, Jigglypuff style eyes, even closed eyelids. I just want to see what I can do here, and again the difference is quite profound depending on what kind of style of eye you go for. I even decided at one point to give him some angry little eyebrows instead of the surprised ones I gave him earlier, just to see what it looked like. And I actually really liked them. I actually liked quite a few of these variations. And the good thing about designing a character yourself is that you're not really locked into a design that you have to follow, so you're free to play around and see what works best. This particular variation here was quite interesting and funny, where I really sealed his eyelids off, and this gave him a very grumpy, sort of dopey look, and you can see how easy it is just to draw a line across and fill in those eyelids above. But in the end, I decided that, well, you know what, I actually liked those kind of unnerving single pixel eyes the best, so I'll keep the angry eyebrows, and I'll just go back to what I had before. Another slight adjustment to the color palette here, and I think it's time to return to that problem we brought up earlier, which is the lighting. So of course, let's keep consistent with the original Pokemon sprites and have the lighting come from the top left. And this change may seem a little daunting at first, but what you can see here is that it's actually quite simple if you just fill in all the shaded areas with that flat base color once again, and just start from the top. So this time, obviously the shadows on the feet are going to be on the opposite side. Everything's going to be flipped, basically. I'm going to add some highlights to the feet, I'm going to add that highlight back to the main body again. And the hardest part of all of this was actually redesigning these vines, because they've got some funky curves going on here. So the lighting of these ones has to be kind of spot on if we want to sell that dimension-y look. And we've certainly got enough colors in our palette to achieve that. You'll notice now that I actually have 4 shades of green, which gives me some nice latitude to play with here to really make those highlights pop and those shadows nice and deep. Same goes for the body. I actually have 6 shades to play with on the body here. So the palette's changed quite a bit from when we began. Which brings us inexorably to the moment we've all been waiting for. Let's see how it turned out. And there it is, our complete little Scuttum, with vines and angry eyebrows. I think it turned out pretty well, considering we only had 15 colours and a pretty bad sketch to work with. So, Scuttum, I choose you!
Well, that just about ties it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this one and perhaps you even learned something. If you did, or you have something to say about today's video, or you have a recommendation for future videos, smash that comment section, or the like button, or the subscribe button to show me some love, wherever they may be. And until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.